Well, welcome. We're doing this new segment in our services, sharing a little bit about some of our Christian heroes. So as a team, we're just going to be offering some of that because I think there's great wisdom we can learn from heroes of the faith, and often sometimes those outside the Bible as well. I'm going to start today by talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's one of my all-time heroes. He was born into this really wealthy middle-class family in Berlin in the early 1900s. The guy graduated with a double PhD by the time he was 22. He was a teacher, and some of the most prestigious theological minds of the time just really respected his work. He ran an incredible theological seminary, mixing deep theological reflection and deep practice together. He's an inspired musician, gifted sportsman, and leader of the church. But for none of these things is he my hero. In the early 1930s, despite being asked to stay in America to write and to teach, Bonhoeffer saw that the way of Nazism and National Socialism in Germany stood in opposition to the church and the way of Jesus, and believing anything that pledges allegiance to anything other than the God is just an idol. So he returned back to Germany despite it being dangerous for him. Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer is best known for his work, The Cost of Discipleship, which was his attempt to understand the centrality of life submitted to Jesus. But whilst this is life to the full discipleship, it comes with great cost to us. He's best known for making the observation that grace is free, but it's also costly. Grace is costly, he says, because it calls us to follow. And it's grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It's costly because it costs a man his life, and it's grace because it gives man the only true life. It's costly because it condemns sin, and it's grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it's costly because it costs God the life of his Son. You were bought at a price, and what has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. Above all, it's grace because God did not reckon his Son too dear a price to pay for our lives, but delivered him up for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God. I think one of the most stunning things for those who don't know the story of Bonhoeffer was how costly the discipleship that he chose would be. Despite being a deep pacifist in his thinking, he chose to work for the German military intelligence during the Second World War because he reckoned that it was better to do an evil thing than to be an evil person, to stand up against evil people. He risked life time and time again to strengthen connections with people outside of Germany about what help was needed, and with the wider church to get them to stand up against fascism. He was banned by Hitler and the Gestapo from preaching and teaching, but began to run his seminary underground, believing that the church had to be faithful to God. He continued to speak out in whatever ways he could, believing that what was needed was more than simply people being good whilst being part of a corrupt system, but rather they needed to stand up against the system. He famously said this: if you board the wrong train, it's no use running along the corridor in the opposite direction. Despite being offered numerous ways to escape Germany, he stayed in the middle of the war, eventually being arrested in 1943 for his part in the plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. In prison, he continued to write, inspiring others and continuing to call people to discipleship that Jesus wants us to. There was a plan hatched to help Bonhoeffer escape from prison, but because he knew it might jeopardize those close to him, he turned it down and stayed in prison. He was executed on the 9th of April 1945, less than a month before the end of the war in Europe. As he was led away to the gallows, he turned to a fellow inmate who'd been ministering to and said, "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life." The doctor overseeing the execution said, "I was deeply moved by the way that this lovable man prayed, so devout and certain that God heard his prayer. At the place of his execution, he again said a short prayer, then climbed the steps, brave and composed. His death ensued a few seconds. In almost 50 years I have worked as a doctor. I've hardly seen a man die so entirely submissive to the will of God. I've enjoyed learning and growing from someone just willing to offer up everything they had for the sake of Jesus and the call he places on our lives." If you want to read more, a brilliant biography by Eric Metaxas called Pastor, Martyr, Prophet and Spy. It's excellent. His book, Life Together, is a great little read on what it means to do life deeply in community. And his classic, The Cost of Discipleship, it's translated into English from German, so you have to get around that, and it's pretty academic, but incredible and stands the test of time. He reminds us so pointedly and poignantly of the call of Jesus. Christianity preaches infinite worth of that which is seemingly worthless, and infinite worthlessness of that which is seemingly so valued. I hope you enjoy finding out a little bit more.